I'll be real transparent. I invited 5 or 6 people to be on the social media panel, and 3 of them were women. A couple of them were not white, and I also invited a couple of my friends who were both white and both men, and we realized we're all about the same age. And so it's ended up being 3 white young guys on social media. But, yeah, thank you. But some of us have been mentored by some really tremendous people, and they just didn't have the time to come. So we're going to channel some of them, and my hope is that this conversation is kind of a starting place. So we're talking about preaching and communication. Keith began by introducing this as kind of a resurrection of something that Bushnell used to do. And it was all focused on preaching. And we've had some focus today on preaching. But the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is communicated in ways that go beyond the Sunday experience. And so at Bushnell, we're trying to wrestle ourselves with what this looks like. My friend Ian is here, and Ian and I are both in new positions where we get to ask some questions as a university. What's our role in telling the story of Bushnell on social media? This is a practical thing that is being played out in my job today. But I think as our churches, we've kind of got these 2 sides of the conversation. One is participate full-blown. We're going to market ourselves. We're going to do it really well. Or maybe the Christian thing is to be a little bit, like Andy Crouch says, a little more Amish than we'd like to be in his TechWise book. And so that's where we begin this conversation, and my friends here have responded to the call to say, can you help us navigate these waters a little bit? So sitting here in the middle is Korte, Zickefoose. Did I say that right?
That's perfect.
Okay. I have a friend who's about to get your last name, so I've got to get it right. I have a couple more months. Yeah. How many days? Don't say Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's a daily ritual in our office to find out how many days until your wedding. So Korte is a graphic designer. He got his graphic design degree at NNU, and then also works at City First Church and used some freelance stuff. But what's your 10, 15 second, who are you, Korte?
Yeah, I'm someone who likes making things that help people. And right now that looks like communications coordinating and doing graphic design. And I really like helping people tell their story better and want to share with you the things that I've taken in and processed in my current role at a church, doing communications, and maybe give you some next steps to help you in your ministries.
Yeah. And Korte was gracious enough to send us some good resources that I'll send out in an email as well for those that weren't able to make our session right now, but you've got the handouts as well. And then Ryan Rosenberg, I think I spelled it wrong a couple times, so I apologize.
Everybody does.
But
my whole life.
It's okay. Ryan was sharing a little bit with us at lunch when we were talking about this, a personal story connected to a podcast a lot of us have listened to on the rise and fall of Mars Hill. So afterwards, you should ask Ryan a little bit about that. He's not in the podcast, barely, but
that's probably a good thing.
Probably a good thing. But yeah, Ryan, I like to say, is kind of our resident Hillsong-esque kind of. He got the black shirt, jeans and stuff. Anyway, Ryan serves at Ecclesia and has been doing youth ministry there, but is transitioning to, I always say transitioning, that's kind of maybe not the right term, but your new role is going to be focused on production, but that's kind of something you've been doing for a long time. So Ryan, just share a little bit about yourself with us.
Yeah, I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I've been in Eugene for about 6 years now, and I would say one of the things I've been most passionate about for most of my life is art, creativity, music, live production, and graphic design. I spent some time in college working on graphics and stuff, and Jesus, and where those two intersect. So how do you use art and creativity to share the gospel in the name of Jesus? And luckily, the Lord planted me at Ecclesia, which is a place that values both of those things. So,
Yeah. So our question that I've posed to you guys to begin is, what is the Christian response to social media? So Korte, why don't you kick us off? What is the Christian response to social media in your mind?
Oh, that's an easy question, Lars. I'll just lay it out for you with all the succinct answers that you're hoping for. But we will try and give you some practical tips of what that looks like. I think that social media inherently started out as a neutral thing. We hear lots of discourse online that's right now pretty toxic, and a lot of people claiming Christianity that come at things from just about every perspective that you can imagine. And I think that the Christian response is called to one of humility and one of listening and one of deep connection and relationship and being in it for the long haul, and a 2,200 character limit on Instagram for a post, or similar 140 on Twitter, or different social media platforms make that extended discourse difficult, limiting for sure. But I think that social media it's a technology. It was intended to be a relational connection. Technology has been, throughout the years, been used for good or for bad. If you think back to the cross, that was technology, and that was terrible. That was a tree that was initially neutral, intended to provide life, turned into something that was really damaging, and then Christ redeemed it for something as a symbol of hope. I think that that's what social media has the potential to do if we have a plan, if we learn, and if we work towards it. So that's my perspective, and that's the initial thought that I have for
and
that
some
question.
of us are just more cynical than others.
So he knows where I'm going with this. No, I think social media did start out as a neutral platform. A lot of us in the room maybe remember MySpace or the early days of Facebook, where it's just for like literally connecting with your friends and family, maybe across the country, and it's not that anymore. At this point, social media, in just about every form, you are the product. You have signed contracts with and user license agreements saying that they can sell your information to companies, and that's why if we talk about my Nike Air Force Ones in the room today, you may or may not get an ad on Facebook later today for Nike Air Force Ones on your phone because they're listening to us. And this is not to be a big conspiracy thing, though it definitely sounds that way at this point. But they're selling you, and it's an ad platform. It's I think the days of just innocent connection are probably gone. And how can the algorithm best figure out who you are, what you are most likely to buy, what you are most likely to interact with and desire, and how can it put that in front of your face? Some of us in the room may have seen The Social Dilemma, the documentary on Netflix. It's literally designed to keep you engaged in an app as much as possible. And the only way it can do that is to disengage you from the world around us. So I don't think it's currently neutral. I do think it does have an opportunity to be used for good, though.
So as we think a little bit about that idea of there's probably a middle ground, and both of you have said there's this tool, this opportunity. We want to both think big picture philosophically about this thing. We want to be aware and critically reflect on it. But we also want to get kind of down to brass tacks. Like if and I mentioned this a little bit in my keynote time this morning at 11, that it takes up a lot of our time. That if we're a church staff, we might have the chance to even hire somebody who does this full time. I was never at a church that had somebody who we could afford to do this full time. And I even have that philosophical question of should we give this job to someone full time? So social media is this time-consuming thing, not just personally, but from a ministry standpoint, to make sure we have an engaging post, to break down Michael's sermon from Sunday and take a snippet of the video and make sure it's not the joke, but it's the text or something. I don't know. This is calling back to earlier, but how do you guys maximize your time and not let it distract or dominate your ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it all starts with a plan. And if you don't have a purpose for social media, I think your time is better spent investing and directly discipling people one-on-one. If you do have a plan, if you do have a purpose, say encouraging people in the community, if you are trying to spread Jesus on social media, Bible verses, sure, that's a cliche thing, but it also is a way of getting your beliefs out into someone else's feed. You'll have friends. Many of us probably have a friend or communities of friends where you are the only Christian who will appear in their feed. So if you're never presenting your beliefs online, never pointing people back to Jesus, then people may not have that opportunity to connect. And I'm not saying that every post is a Bible verse or every post is, check out this new Carrie Newhoff podcast that I listened to. I think you'd really benefit from it. Which, great, check him out. But having a plan and then keeping it simple and measurable. And that's something that I think whether you have a church marketing team, a communications team, or if you are at a church of two, we've got a pastor and an office manager. If you've got a plan that's simple, telling a story or two each month, if you can only create one or two posts, create something that's quality. People would much rather see something that's really meaningful rather than 10 posts in 2 weeks of just a copy and pasted Bible verse from BibleGateway.com in your favorite translation. So keeping a plan and then measuring that plan and simplify it, because there's just, I think, way too much out there that will distract. And just to keep on top of the algorithms, it takes a lot of effort. And I'm paid to do that as my job, and I still fall behind in keeping things up to date. So if you've got a short amount of time in your time budget and you've got all these other responsibilities, come up with one simple action item and then measure it for a couple weeks, for a couple months, and then revisit it. And that would be a great place to start with social media.
Yeah, I think your plan has to be where you start. The whole if you fail to plan, you plan to fail sort of thing. I also think there's a balancing act between intentionality and authenticity. We have all seen social media influencers and people like that putting their best foot forward, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, Lars, but that's not always the real world that they live in. If any of you guys are familiar with the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast, great podcast. He said in one episode there's about 28 man hours that goes into him making his podcast. That's almost a full-time job. And maybe you've got a staff of 1 or a staff of 20. That's one podcast. That's released once a month. That's crazy. So that balance between authenticity and intentionality, people want to see something that's done well, something that's engaging, something that's encouraging and uplifting, because what we're surrounded by on social media is not that. It's not that. So as the church, put your best foot forward, but be honest, be real. If you can, post photos and images from your own church, from your own congregation, because that's what's going to get the most traction with the people who attend your church, and that which has the most opportunity to be shared, which kind of goes into letting the program, letting the app do its thing, and the more you interact with it, the more it's going to spread itself.
Yeah, I think that's key. We found is that announcement posts and things like that, we spend a lot of time trying to make text readable. And if I just showed you people, the algorithm actually wins and puts my content up there more. And so, I had one friend say, don't ever post pictures of worship, Post pictures of the donuts, right? Post pictures of people being greeted at the door, because worship is like, to the non-Christian, like, what is that? Like, people are raising their hands and, what is that? What is going on? But if you post real life pictures of people hanging out together, the algorithm actually wins for you. And if all you're doing is posting event invites with text overlaid over things, the algorithm is kind of punishing you. And so, that's something we started to maximize our time by not posting as much of this other content that isn't what the algorithm wants. So I'm not trying to surrender that the algorithm is right, but I'm trying to be realistic with what I can spend my time doing.
It is in charge. It might not be right, but it is in charge.
It is in charge. So we've talked a little bit about this earlier in the conference about conflict, and I've seen some people leverage conflict because it wins in the algorithm. The 100 comment post, and it's just like, well, what is that? I'm going to click on that and scroll down, and you get lost in that back and forth Twitter battle or something. Typically, it's on the Facebook wall. Maybe there's two mutual friends of this one person who makes a post, and then these two mutual friends get into an argument battle back and forth. And the person who posted the post is not even involved anymore. It's these other two people who don't know each other in real life. And you're just like, what? Get a room or something. So bring in church issues, though, to stuff. How do you safeguard and handle conflict in digital spaces?
It's a great question. Another softball question tossed this way. Well, I think take the discourse offline. Having all of these back and forth threads where you can't see body language, you can't hear someone's backstory, you can't hear the bad day where they spilled coffee into their purse or stubbed their toe on the way into their meeting and their day has just spiraled. It's really hard to humanize someone online. You literally flatten people into a 2D screen when you're interacting with them on social media. And regardless of the issue, I think Christians are called to have these relationships, these in-depth relationships, having phone calls. Wouldn't it be interesting if you had a phone call instead of a 140-character chat back and forth for days? Another way, if you really have to send something online, sending audio messages instead of text is an interesting thing that you could try that personalizes something with your tone of your voice. People can hear the sounds that you are making and can engage in more of a conversation that way. So audio messages are, again, it's a monologue, it's not a conversation, and I'd say whenever you have the chance to take it into a dialogue rather than a monologue, and if you can take it offline, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I would say as far as the goal would probably be mitigating conflict, right? Avoiding it before it starts. Not every response, not every comment on a post on social media deserves a response from you or your church communications person or pastor, because your response will just lead to another response, and then before you know it, talking about managing time, that's out the window. No one ever walks away from those 100 comment things and goes, they had some really valid points. I changed my mind. They're right. I'm wrong. I will cede, and I'm going to let them know. And let's be honest here. Most of the time, those things are not over open-handed theological differences. It's over current political climate. It's over, racial relations and all these things that have been prioritized in the culture at large. Not saying the church should not pay attention to those things, but our mission is to bring glory to the name of Jesus, not necessarily to be right in an interpersonal conflict. That is for the Lord to handle. You see in Romans 12, don't turn evil for evil, but respond to evil with good. in doing so. You'll let the Lord handle that situation. The best thing you can probably do is just turn commenting off. If it's getting out of hand, turn commenting off. If you struck a chord with your church, in humility, say, hey, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't have said that. Maybe you can take it down. But ultimately, the goal is not to be right and to win with anything. The truth of Scripture is the truth of Scripture, and a lot of people don't believe it. What we want to do is we want them to hear the truth of Scripture and understand who Jesus is.
I had a follow-up to that. You could turn off commenting if you want a really practical one. Facebook has an option where you can direct message someone right in a comment. You can send them a message in that thread. So if you want to maximize your time, you're responding to comments maybe from your worship service that was streamed online or a post, you can say, send a direct message. We can take a page out of customer service books, people online who get poor reviews. Not saying that we are a commodity to sell, but we can still serve people with our communication online. And that can be, we are so sorry that you had this experience. We would love to connect with you, or a pastor would love to follow up with a conversation. And that way, you're responding online, showing that you're being proactive with your communication and that you are wanting to engage in these deeper dialogues with people. And so that's another practical way of engaging with someone online, showing something online, and again, taking it into a deeper one-on-one de-escalated environment.
So we want to talk a little bit about the creativity. We've got a couple creative people here. How are you guys seeing some creative ways that churches are sharing the gospel on social media? Ryan, I know you're part of a collaborative project right now too.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start with that. And you mentioned One Hope, the network, earlier, and there's an initiative going on called Overflow Hope that I'm a part of, along with Steve and Patty Buss at One Hope. And it's really just to do literally just that, to overflow hope, to see stories of hope, stories of transformation and change across our community. That's through a video initiative, through billboards maybe that you've seen on Coburn Road. There's a website, there's going to be social media channels. And the goal of that is not just to encourage other Jesus followers, right? The goal of that is for Jesus followers to encourage the culture and the rest of Lane County around us. So I think that's incredible. I was in a conversation the other day with someone talking about how sometimes worship is worship's not a performance. Well, anytime you're doing something for anyone or in front of anyone, it becomes a performance. Are you trying to draw attention to yourself, though, or are you trying to, again, point attention to the God who created you? Being creative in and of itself is imitating our Creator in a good way. And if you look through the church throughout antiquity, we would see that the printing press, this new technology, this creativity, is to get the gospel out. Gothic cathedrals were built in a way where there was no microphones like this, but they could stand in the pulpit and the entire room would hear them. We had Gregorian chants moving into music that had not just perfect fifths, but this variety of melodies and this content. The stained glass in and of itself was there to tell the story of Jesus. So today we use lights and we use screens and microphones and video cameras and all that to be creative and to share the story of Jesus.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I think we need more of that in the church. We need to bring at least the part of the denomination that I'm a part of and the churches I've been a part of where beauty is often an added on thing. It's not a core idea. It's not a valid way of sharing truth. Art through the ages has been a way of sharing truth with an illiterate society. Literally, that was how stories were communicated. But now we've got all these different ways of connecting. And so all of those take into account the culture they're a part of and then present the gospel in a way that is compelling and engaging. A way that I've seen the gospel shared creatively is whenever user interface is how things are presented on your device. It's how users interact with things. It's the buttons, it's the shapes, it's all of that. I love posts that have user interface that people are used to seeing as part of their social media posts or their phone, their Maps app, and have that with Christian content in it. It's like, you missed a call, who from? God. And it's like this person who is trying to reach out to you. It's using the medium as the message. It's using something that, like a comment thread going back and forth, and showing the ridiculousness of it, and showing how, like, is there another way? There is another way of engaging with people online. It's of waiting patiently. It's of, they're just creative ways of taking what's around you, what people are familiar with, and then presenting that with the truth of the gospel.
Right, that's contextualization, right? We see Jesus doing that throughout his ministry in parables and stories, and I think that's really been important to our church. And as I've gotten involved with One Hope and this Overflow Hope, how do we tell stories? How do we tell the stories of Jesus doing something incredible? And Jesus begins so many of those with the kingdom of God is like. And we are all part of the kingdom of God, and we've got opportunities to share those stories. Using social media, this medium to interact and not just consume, but to connect with people is important, but it needs to go beyond that, just like mitigating that conflict. It needs to go beyond social media, and how does that lead to interacting with people face-to-face, with people hearing Jesus? Yeah.
So the flip side of the coin, what are things you're seeing that concern you on social media? Maybe it's something that another church is doing. I know I follow a lot of churches on social media. I follow some pastors on social media. Now the algorithm is showing me some of those pastors. Even, I get done scrolling with Instagram through all my people, and it's like, you're caught up, but there's more. And some of them are like, I'm like, whoa, that's like, what is that? It's Stephen Furtick. I don't know. Anyway, so what are some things, and not just Stephen Furtick examples, but what are some things? If you don't know Preachers in Sneakers, you should go check out Preachers in Sneakers. You guys know?
I feel a little called out right now, man.
Yours, those aren't $350 sneakers.
No, they are not.
Okay, good. No, anyway, you should, Preachers in Sneakers, anyway, Michael will be critiquing your Converse shoes later. What are, okay, it's good. Yes, what are some things that concern you on social media that churches and pastors maybe are doing?
I think by and large, people have a good heart. They start out with a good intention. Whenever they think of, I should post this online, and then they do, between that span, maybe the iterations of them thinking, okay, how should I craft this post? How should I do this? They might lose sight of, we're trying to point people to Jesus. What is Jesus trying to say to us in this cultural moment? And this idea and this goal of us trying to share hope, pastors trying to share hope, parachurch ministry leaders trying to share encouraging stories in the community, we lose sight of stories. And I think that when we return to the stories within our congregation, that's when things get more real, more raw, that people aren't seeing another stock image or another reshared post. People see the things that are happening within your content, within your congregation. Something that's worrying is the 100 comment threads. It's like, wow, how much time could you have spent in a coffee shop connecting with someone instead of going back and forth late at night when you're in bed and you're just staying up till 11 or 12 and going back and forth with this person? I think there's ways to spend that time even better. I think another thing that's maybe a less deep but more practical standpoint, emails are a much more effective way that don't have to deal with an algorithm, that people give connection, give permission to reach out to them, and it's going to their inbox. That is a much better way of connecting with actual details. So if people are posting these announcement posts are great. I post announcement posts. But there are other ways of sharing and getting people on an email newsletter or a website. Those are things that you own. You're not. The algorithm is owned by businesses with more marketing dollars than we could ever hope to see. So let alone someone who's like paid to do social media. It's just a cost-benefit analysis of, well, I'm only able to get this number of people the right information at the right time. Put that into your emails, put that onto your website, and coach your congregation to say, hey, go to this page, go to this email, sign up for this email. And that's a much more effective way of sharing information. So there are a couple different ideas there, these 100-post threads or these announcement posts that don't necessarily get a lot of engaging feedback.
Yeah, I mean, Lars mentioned kind of my story with Mars Hill. If you're familiar with the podcast, I heard somebody say that it's the second most popular thing in Christianity behind the Bible right now. And I thought that was funny until I realized that it's probably only us in the United States that are listening to this podcast. And there are another few billion Christians around the world who don't care about that. But I think one thing that we can kind of learn, if you're familiar with it, it's worth a listen. Mars Hill got caught up in the reach and in the social media and in the very early days of social media when it was neutral and they used it for good and kind of got lost in it. Social media should be a tool that your church and that your ministry uses. It is not evangelism in its purest form. You can evangelize with it, but if you're building something and you've got screws, you can use a hammer and you can nail in that screw all day, but it's probably not going very far. At some point, you're going to need a drill or you're going to need a screwdriver. You're going to need the right tool. You're going to need to use it appropriately. And I think social media is becoming something that is so time-consuming across all these different platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, all these different things where, man, how do we invest in all these different sources? Do we post the same content or is it different content? And that time, it's just not worth it. Not saying it's not useful, but it's not worth it to lose yourself in the reach. Yeah.
I think something that we all mused on, which was interesting, is that on various levels, our personal social media presence is fairly diminished. That at times we may have been more invested in a particular platform, but even though we do this work as part of our jobs, we don't invest as much of our personal time as many of our peers or our spouses. Was a conversation that we had. And my wife is a MLM, multi-level marketing, Mary Kay, and she does a lot of her stuff over social media. And it's good. It's cool. It's really interesting how she's using this tool. But I often talk about the difficulty, the reason why I enjoy doing social media for places like Bushnell or for my church is because I'm building a brand that is not the Lars brand. And I think the danger sometimes is that we can, in saying we're building a church brand or we're sharing Jesus or we're trying to point them to the gospel, we can still be building our own brand. And then even asking that question as the church, does the church need to have a brand? Do we need to build this brand? Or is it about Jesus? And so I think that's something that I see blurry right now with a lot of influencers on social media. They're getting rewarded. In fact, I have a friend who was probably a B or C list actress in Hollywood, and she was on a fairly well-known CW show that's on Netflix right now. But she now gets paid. She has sponsored content on Instagram and TikTok and things. She gets mailed sunglasses, and she's an influencer because she has 4,000, 5,000 friends or something. That is what social media is kind of being about. You need to build a brand so that you're an influencer of content. And I think that's a dangerous place to be as people who are about Jesus and sharing a message of Jesus. The temptation is always there to build our brand in order to share a message we think is valuable and important. But it's really hard not to let it become about us. I was just reminded in my role as Director of University Relations by President Joe Womack that the most important thing I can do to make my speaking better on behalf of the university is to remove every statement that begins with I. And I thought, wow, that's so hard, especially when it comes to social media, to remove those statements of I. But if we have a message of hope, it should be about Jesus, not about I. So we're to that point of some practical steps. Korte, you've given us some great resources. Ryan, let's let you kick it off, and then Korte, you can clean it up. What's some great practical next steps that you would recommend, whether we're a technological dinosaur, as I talked about it earlier, and we haven't started, but we think we should, or maybe we're doing it, but we want to think critically about it. What are some recommendations you have?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the plan, figure out what you're trying to do with social media. Are you trying to reach people who don't know the Lord? If so, your social media will reflect that. Are you trying to reach young people in Gen Z? Are you trying to reach young families? Are you trying to, make these large, grandiose statements about who God is or something in the political landscape? I would discourage you from doing that last one. But figure out what you're trying to do, who you're trying to reach, and then what platform best suits that. To talk resource-wise, we connected in the back just briefly. Pro Church Tools with Brady Shearer is probably the most actionable resource online on how does your church do announcements, in-person, live stream. How do you use a live stream? Is there equipment and gear you need to buy? How much time and effort should you really be putting into it? He addresses all those questions. It's not gospel, but it's informed, and he's got a team working together to put together this material so that you don't have to. You just have access to it, and it's huge. So check that out, Brady Shearer, and then, like I said, be authentic. There's not a lot of that. Our culture just lacks authenticity because people don't want to see the reality anymore. When I look back on my own Facebook posts from high school, and I cry. I outwardly cry. That is, why in the world would I post that? And why did I not proofread that? There's so many typos. And I was a high school kid. It didn't matter. I was using this thing that was brand new and it was fresh. Well, it's not that anymore. It is ingrained into our daily lives. So I think addressing it and saying, what am I trying to say? What is my message? Who is my audience? We see that throughout the New Testament and the way that Paul's epistles are written. It's intentional, but it's also very, very real. Be able to say what you need to say, and going back to overflow hope, let it be hopeful. The message of Jesus, the gospel, is offensive. You're bad, you're broken, there's nothing you can do to fix it. Nobody likes hearing that. So if you're posting that gospel message, somebody's going to be combative because you're speaking to who they are, their identity, and we know that our identity is reshaped in Jesus, but they don't know that yet. And you're not going to be able to get that to them through a post on social media, or even if you were to video me saying this and posting this on Instagram, somebody's going to see that and go, nope, he's wrong, and scroll past it. So don't get too caught up in that.
Yeah, I'd say just linking off of that, give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. Give your office team member who's doing social media, your youth pastor, or your communications person, give yourself grace and time to experiment with things on social media, to give yourself accurate data. So give yourself a plan, give yourself time to capture those results, figure out, okay, I'm going to try and post one story of transformation in my congregation once a month, or once every 2 months even. And going to see what the engagement's like, see if people are responding to it, saying, hey, wow, I'm really encouraged by that, or if they're sharing it, encourage people to share it. That's one thing that you could try doing. And then set aside time to evaluate and see, okay, was that doing what I tried to have it do? Did it accomplish what I wanted it to accomplish? And just reiterating the Brady Shear Pro Church tools, excellent online content that gives you really actionable things to check out. And that list of resources has a lot of great, everything from posting frequency to content per social media platform to how do we think about social media? How are we engaging ourselves in the digital sphere?
Yeah. You talked about engagement a little bit, and I think for some of us when we hear like, oh, what's the engagement like on that post? We think just specifically likes, comments, that sort of thing. That is engagement. The important part is if you're putting any time and energy into your social media and it's not reaching anybody, then you are wasting time. And that we don't have time to do that, right? So engagement is important. Like, it doesn't need to drive your life. But if you're putting 5 hours a week into social media and it's reaching nobody, then you're wasting 5 hours a week. How could you better use that? That's discipleship opportunities. That's another church gathering if you feel like that's the better way to use your time. Look at engagement and let the metrics point you to people, not just numbers, and let them give you insight, but don't let that drive the ship.
Yeah. So we're going to continue this conversation. I think at Bushnell, I got a chance to sit with some people in our marketing and business school, and there's some interest in asking some questions around social media and marketing. And my hope is that we'll continue these kinds of professional development opportunities to ask the big question: what is the Christian response? And maybe that's the wrong question, as Troy and Doyle would ask us to say. Maybe we need to think this a little bit from a different perspective. And so I hope that you'll pick these guys' brains as we go. I hope that you'll continue engaging in this conversation that we host over the next, I think, couple of years. That my hope is that we don't just blindly march to the orders of the algorithms, but that we also don't just abstain and say, we're not going to participate. Because I think that also says something about our Christian witness. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in running church and the practicalities. And my hope is that we've given you some tools to go after some of the practicalities. And we've also caused you to just say, what would it look like to take a staff meeting? What would it look like to take even a Sunday and just pause and ask some critical questions about the ways in which I'm communicating the gospel through our live stream, through our social media? Are we doing this just because everyone else is doing this? Are we doing this thoughtfully? So we are done with our time, but these guys, I think, will probably be in the lobby. You can pick their brain. I certainly want to thank you so much for spending your day with us, and invite you to just pay attention to the next time we host this. We're going to do another signature event in the fall, probably around October or November, and have this rhythm of 2 signature events, and then ongoing professional development, I'm calling them, for pastors that will happen on a more frequent basis. So thank you, and go in peace. And we got it.